Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the True Cost of Your Merchant Processing Agreement webinar. I'm excited to have everybody on board, and we are going to go through some information for you. At the very end, we will open it up to questions, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Stu Kehler, and I am the director here of Merchant Services for Mocha Payments. I do reside out of our Fort Collins, Colorado office, and I'm a payment industries expert. I have actually been in this industry for over 10 years, and I have worked with over 4 different major backend processors in this industry, which has given me a lot of experience and insight into how all these merchant accounts get set up and how they affect merchants. I do really enjoy working with business owners. My passion is to educate and also to learn. So I love helping business, but actually learning about various industries by just working with them. And I do really consider every client as a partner. It's one of our goals here at Mocha Payments is just basically to let people know that we're working for you and we want to make sure that you guys are happy. So that's why we are doing this educational webinar to help people learn a little bit more about these contracts and these agreements. So what we're going to cover today is going to be, we'll start with the who's of the industry. There is kind of a few different players that we'll be talking about. So I just want to kind of give some explanation and description about those various industries and players that you work with every single merchant account. And then the bulk of it is that we are going to be covering the terms and conditions of merchant account agreements and how they sort of relate to the rates and fees, mostly in regards to how those can change. So we'll talk about the potential for arbitrary rate increases from processors. We will cover some red flags, things just to watch out for and just kind of be wary of if you are looking to change processors or simply are just in a renegotiation of your current contracts. And then on that same line, we're going to talk about some of the contract terms and early termination fees or early deactivation fees is how some processors put it, just so you kind of know what your options are and what it entails to make a switch. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the who's. So when it comes to working with a merchant account, the face that most merchants see is usually the agent. Agents are typically individual reps that have partnered up with an ISO in order to be able to offer credit card processing services. They are the ones that usually show up at your door, offer you better rates. In many cases, they will sometimes also provide some support or terminal service, but it will be usually strictly just standalone. Now, the term ISO stands for Independent Sales Organizations. So the agents will usually partner up with a local one. Many cases, it all depends. But the ISO is the group or organization that really sets up and supports your merchant processing services. So in other words, they actually do the boarding process with the backend processor, and they also will provide sort of the direct contact number, or you will have a rep with them in order to get assistance, if you have questions about your account, or if you need to make changes. Now, the processors, these are I like to just call them the technical back end, but they are really the system companies in place to process, facilitate, and execute all the transactions that go through. So in other words, getting the authorizations, checking transactions, voids, returns, all of that has to run through one of the major backend processes out there. There are, not very many left. There have been a lot of acquisitions over the years, so we've gone down from 50 to 60 of them down to almost about 8 or 9 backend processors now. However, that is sort of their job. You don't oftentimes work directly with the processor as a merchant. You will work with the ISO, but the processors are the ones that are actually handling and facilitating those transactions. Now, every single processor is required to set up through an acquiring bank. We call them the acquirers, and they are the ones that actually maintain the merchant processing accounts. In other words, they are the ones that assume the risk of these transactions in many cases. So if there is ever, fraud or something like that, that's a fraudulent account, then they're going to be the ones that essentially front the bill for that. Now, it is possible for the processor and the acquirer to be the same company, but in most cases, it's going to be a different acquirer for each processor. So what we're going to kind of cover here with the merchant processing terms and conditions. First thing is that every merchant processing agreement, we call an MPA, will have a terms and conditions document. Now, this document is separate from the agreement itself. It is usually put in as a website link. So you will, if you review your MPA, you'll see on there, either at the top or somewhere near the signature, that the terms and conditions can be viewed at, and that it will have this website link. This is just an example that I have here. That brings you to typically a PDF document of the full terms and conditions. It is done this way so that the terms and conditions cannot be modified. So when you are signing your MPA, you're signing the contract or agreement, you are agreeing to the terms and conditions in that link, not a modified version that might have been handed to you from a potential agent or rep, because that agreement says you have to go to this link to get the official terms and conditions. Now, that's the one since that's the one you're agreeing to, it is possible to have an amended version of it. But if you do have an amended terms and conditions, you would have to have a separate third document from the processor stating that your MPA, your application, is agreeing to a separate terms and conditions, separate document, not the website link. So without having that third amended document or amended agreement, the one in the link would be the one that actually applies to your merchant account. So what is our terms and conditions? Terms and conditions cover a lot. There are usually 20 to 30 pages in there, and majority of it is going over the rules and liability of the merchant account services and the transactions that go through this account. Now, there are a lot of potential different type of transactions, ways that they can be run, things that can occur. It really tries to cover every possible situation that's out there. Now, the terms and liability for the process themselves will oftentimes be fairly vague regarding rates. In other words, it will oftentimes detail that for most processors, they have the right to change any rate or fee with little or no notice. Now, I know that sounds odd for most contracts out there, and especially when the terms of these are usually 3 years or 36 months that do auto renew at the end of the term. So you're signing a 3-year contract at a negotiated rate and fee, but the terms and conditions is going to state in there that they have this ability to change those rates and fees. Now, I'm sure most of you are asking, why are they allowed to do that? So why are processors allowed to change these terms? Well, the fact is that card merchant accounts or card processing rates and fees they're negotiated based on a few numerous factors. The biggest one is most likely going to be the volume. Your current annual processing volume is a big factor of that, or the number of transactions. Also, PCI DSS compliance. That is something that the terms of that can change if a company or business changes their system or their way of processing credit cards. So that sort of risk that's coming along with it. And then there's also the card network, Visa, Master, Discover, Amex. There's also the PIN debit networks when changes occur for them. So any of these factors can change at any term in that 36 months. And because of that, the processors do want to have that ability to make adjustments to the merchant account. Now, unfortunately, this also allows for sort of arbitrary rate increases and in some cases sort of an abuse of those terms and conditions. Because those terms are so vague, really processors can allow a rate fee just at any time. They don't actually have to have a full explanation for that. Now, this has led to some predatory aspects of the industry, some businesses that we like to call pop-up ISOs, where it's oftentimes a group of salespeople, usually it's a smaller group, that create a brand to sell merchant processing services through a processor. They offer what we oftentimes call teaser rates that seem very good. The merchant thinks they're going to save a lot of money, but then as soon as they've signed that agreement, the processor raises those rates and fees, or they increase the costs on that merchant account. And then obviously, if they do have a high early termination fee on that contract, you're, as a merchant, you're oftentimes stuck between a rock and a hard place. And the pop-up term basically comes from the fact that by doing that type of practice, they're going to get bad reviews. So obviously, whether it's the BBB rating, or they might even just get in trouble with the backend processor they're working with, who doesn't allow those type of practices. They'll either get reviews or their brand will kind of fade, and then they will create a new brand name, pop up as a new ISO, and then do the practice all over again. Same group, same routine, same processes, just under a different name. So, and unfortunately, it has continued, and these sort of terms and conditions allow them to make those adjustments and kind of continue that. Now, a lot of processors have tried to mitigate it. They do background searches on any partnerships that they're looking to have sign up with them, but sometimes they can still get squeezed through. So let's talk about what to look for, these red flags. So as we mentioned, pop-up ISOs are small sales groups who do not provide support or services. They will oftentimes, if you sign up with them, they're going to tell you that you have to call a third-party company or a outsourced service company. If you have any questions, you're not going to be calling the sales group. Their focus is strictly just to set up as many accounts as possible as quickly as they can, so they can lock them into a contract, raise the rates and fees, and then let them ride out. So I would ask the questions about if you're looking to move or change companies. Do they have internal support? Ask them what number they'd be calling, who would they be speaking with. Try to get details from them about, are they really actually going to be helping you in providing long-term service, or are they really just looking to set you up and forget about you? Another red flag is going to be if there's no physical location listed for the business or organization. As a pop-up ISO, they have to change brand. They're going to sometimes have a very vague term of where they're located, so that they can just kind of use that with another brand or another name. Now, the liquidated damages on an early termination fee policy is the biggest red flag, because this term, or this clause, allows the ISO, the processor, to charge essentially what would be the total fees that would accrue on the account over that 3-year term. In other words, as opposed to just this flat dollar amount, $200 or $300 or whatever, they could charge thousands of dollars that would potentially accrue in fees for that full term of the agreement. So that is one that I would say absolutely never ever sign an agreement, because the terms still apply that they can change those rates and fees should you not. And if you want to cancel, you're going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place there. And then the other one is going to be with hardware and software, point of sale systems that don't allow third-party processors. We have seen a large number of newer point of sale systems that essentially try to have their own acquirer, their own back end for the merchant services, and they significantly overcharge on those as part of the setup, but they don't provide any other options. So kind of like if you were trying to negotiate your internet provider services or something along the lines of your cellular. If it's the only option out there, that company is most likely going to be overcharging. Whereas if there is some competition, you know that they most likely will be a little bit more fair in their rates and fees. So be wary of any system that you're looking into that does not allow any outside or third-party processing. Now, when it comes to getting out of a contract, as we talked about, most of these merchant services are typically 3 years or 36 months, but they will almost all have a set dollar amount as the early termination or early due activation fee. But you do need to be careful, and just there are still a select few processes that have those liquidated damages. So make sure that if you do change, you read through those terms and conditions, check to make sure they don't have that, or at least verify they just have a set dollar amount and no other terms when it comes to needing to cancel that agreement early. Now, we've already talked about this. The ETF's liquidated damages is calculated based on the fees, total charges that would accrue for the contract term, but a set dollar amount that you should see with a standard merchant processing agreement is going to be usually between $295, around $300 to $500 per merchant ID for you need to cancel that 3-year agreement early. So again, keep an eye on it, look for that set dollar amount, and just steer clear of anything that talks about liquidated damage. So let's just quickly touch on these key takeaways here. I know it's a lot of information to cover, but the main point is that rates are never guaranteed in this industry. Those terms and conditions allow these changes to occur because of fluctuations and changes in the industry, but it does open things up to processors or ISOs to allow them to make some adjustments in mid-contract. So you do want to make sure that if a rep promises you that something is guaranteed, that's not true. At that point, I would say, what is going to be the terms if we have to cancel this early? In other words, if you guys do raise our rates and fees, and I'm not happy with it, I want to switch companies, what is it going to cost me to do that? A background check on any processor that you're looking to move into is always helpful. Check to see, did they just start up? Most pop-up ISOs usually last about 1 to 2 years before the reviews catch up with them, or the bad press. And so they'll usually pop up about every 1 to 2 years. So I would look for some longevity in any ISO process that you're looking to work with. You do always want to verify the terms of the contract and those early termination fees. And if you are changing hardware or changing to a point of sale system, check to see that it works with multiple processors, because it's going to be one of those where you could pay significantly more if it's going to be only one option, or if they do have a dedicated processor to have, and you want to know that you have the option to negotiate that. So with that, I would like to open it up to questions.
Thanks, Stu. A lot of great information in there. We do have a few questions that have come through. One question we have is, if you do want to cancel or terminate a contract, is it a pretty hard process, or is it straightforward?
It is usually very straightforward. The key thing is to know who to contact. We've talked about the various players, as far as the agent, the ISO, the processor, the acquirer. The contract is going to be almost always with the processor, the back end. And so I would, rather than calling up the agent, I would call the processor or the ISO, which is the company that actually supports the merchant account, and try to do your cancellation through them. They will just usually ask for something in writing. So rather than just a phone call, you may just need to send in an email or a letter stating that you need to cancel or deactivate your account, and at which point they should inform you of what the fee is to cancel that if you're not already aware. But otherwise, it is a fairly straightforward process.
Great, good to know. Are there certain processors that are known to increase rates and processors that you should avoid?
To be perfectly honest, there really are not. It's one of those where we've seen it across the board, and it's just because of it's the industry. The fact that interchange rates, which are those association fees that go to the card issuing banks that are same for everybody, those can fluctuate. They often only get adjusted every 6 months by the card networks, by Visa and MasterCard. But because of those potential fluctuations, even companies that do flat rate pricing, we've seen aggregators out there like Square and PayPal, where they oftentimes just have a flat rate. We've seen those change and increase or get adjusted because of the fluctuating industry. So I wouldn't say that there is any processor that's immune to it, so to speak. It's just more about trying to be aware of what your terms of your agreement are, so that you know that if you need to change, you have that option to do so.
Good to know. We have a question here. Are there any government controls in place that control rates for credit card or for processing?
There are some, but very few. There has been some lobbying that's been done in many cases to for the benefit of merchants. The biggest one I would say was probably a little over 10 years ago, when the Durbin Amendment was passed. And essentially what it did was it required all federally regulated banks to have a lower or set interchange rate of 0.05% and 22 cents for any debit or credit cards that are run offline. So, and that's something that every single processor in the industry was required to abide by. So there are a few, but not a lot, and there really aren't any in regards to these that I've seen in regards to these terms and conditions for the cancellation fees or the contracts.
Great. So how would you say Mocha Payments is different from other processors?
I would say that we're different because we branched off. We're a group that have worked with point of sales, and we have experience in that industry for over 30 years with retailers. So aside from being a full ISO that provides service and support along with the boarding of the accounts, we actually have the familiarity and the experience of integration with a lot of different systems out there, whereas most ISOs are strictly about the merchant accounts. They may offer a solution or two when it comes to hardware or software, but when it comes down to it, they're really just trying to sell those. We're looking to try to find the best solution for our merchants, and we want to take care of them. So we work hard to maintain that service, and we also do rate monitoring and regulation so that our merchants are aware if there have been any arbitrary changes or increases to the industry. They can kind of prepare for that. And we also try to work with the processors to make sure that they don't have any increases that are not necessary or not required by their contract.
Good to know. One final question: if people are interested in Mocha Payments, what services do you offer, or how do they get in contact with you?
So we do provide free statement or cost analysis. So for anyone that's not quite sure what their terms of their agreement are, or perhaps wanted to see if maybe their rates and fees have had a change or increase, we can provide an analysis to you to show you what your current costs are, and we can even actually compare that to other processors, seeing what they're offering out there and what the potential savings might be. And then we can do so with the knowledge that we can provide either the same or a comparable integration to whatever software or hardware they already have. We're not going to make any promises that it's going to be the setup that we actually can't offer. So part of that, it goes with that 30 years of experience of knowing how their system works and being able to integrate with it. They can send anything over, questions, to contact@mochapayments.com. or they can just call us directly. We do have a toll-free number, which is 1-800-425-6040, or even just visit us online at mochapayments.com.